I hope everybody will be okay with it. So, hello everybody. It's very pleased to introduce today's lecturers, who is Bjoern Jespersen, and I'm very pleased to welcome all of you at our today's lecture. It's a part of lecture series under the project Analytic Philosophy in Visegrad Countries, in which we discuss contributions of analytic philosophers from Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary. And today we continue with Czech contributions. If you were with us previously, you know that we have Professor Peregrin, and now we have Professor Bjoern Jespersen, who will talk about Pavel Tichý. And I had to say that the project was supported by Visegrad Fund, to which we are very gracious for their support, especially financial support. And Professor Jespersen, as I told you, will discuss Pavel Tichý's contributions, his transparent intentional logic. As you all probably know, he's a great expert in the field. He recently published with Maria Duží and Pavel Materna the book Procedural Semantics for Hyperintensional Logic. I'm sorry for my English. Foundations and Applications of TIL. And he's also author of his collected papers that I have in class, and he write a very nice foreword to the collection, the foundations of Tichý's logic, which I really appreciate, and I really recommend it too. And today he will introduce his transparent intentional logic. So without further ado, Professor Jespersen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. So I'll go through about 20 slides, and that should take about 45 minutes, upwards of an hour. We'll do a Q&A afterwards. So Pavel Tichý does qualify as a Czechoslovak rhetorician and philosopher, so he very much belongs within this project, even though he did his most important work after he left Czechoslovakia, or the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic, around 1970 in order to move to New Zealand. And he was mainly in New Zealand, but he was also in the United States on a couple of shorter research stays. He passed away in New Zealand in the mid-90s, and I unfortunately never got to meet him. I did meet, of course, Pavel Tichý, who was my supervisor, and later on I would also begin to work with Maria Duží, and she and I have worked extensively the last, whatever it is, 25 years, I think. Pavel Tichý put out one book in his lifetime, which is called The Foundations of Frege's Logic. It's two books in one. It's an exegesis of parts of Frege's logic, particularly his mature logic, which was very original, I think also completely solid work, but it was slightly non-standard. And the other book that was in this monograph was, of course, an exposition and defense of TIL. It's a difficult book to read, I found at the time, and it's a book that if you want to start TIL, you don't start with this book. You'll come to it eventually. And the book on the right is a collection we put out in 2004, and it runs to 900 pages. So he published in his lifetime 900 pages worth of articles in major journals of philosophy and logic. And it's quite an impressive oeuvre he compiled there. In 2010, Pavel Materna, Maria Duží, and I published this 550-page tome on the left, which was where we brought TIL up to date. And we revised some of the foundations, and we presented a wide range of applications in that book. And so when somebody talks about TIL 2010, it refers to TIL as of that book. The book was due for an update. We didn't update the book, though. We compiled major publications that have come out since the 2010 book, and Couch Publications were kind enough to publish the book in red in their series, logic series, which is now there, whatever it is, 700 pages of text. So if you want to study Till, there's a couple of thousand pages you need to plow through. Marie Dushi and I did that together with Miloš Kostelec and Daniela Glavničová, who's now Daniela Vacek. And recently, there was last year, Miloš Kostelec published his own book, monograph on Till and a parallel system, also based on Till, devised by Jastrzębski in this book is a comparison of the two approaches to Till. Pavel Tichý himself published a couple of books, and the major one would be the green one, which came out in '98, where he developed a theory of concept on the basis of Pavel Tichý's theory of constructions, which we nowadays call procedures, which are hyperintensions. And the color of the book is not accidental. I think Till is one of the few theories out there which has its own color, which is green. So we simply because that was the color of the cover of Pavel Tichý's 1988 book, which we would sometimes refer to as the Green Bible. Here's a list of papers that have come out after the 23 collection, the Red Book, which is like, 10 papers. There's some more, but these are representative publications which come out in prominent venues. And I think this fact also speaks to the fact that Till has become increasingly prominent. It's become a household name among people who are active in hyperintensional logic. They may or may not understand appreciate the finer details of Till, but they're aware of its existence and at least the basic ideas. It also makes so it's gotten the attention that appreciation that it deserves. It also makes our lives a little bit easier because we can kind of presuppose some familiarity with Till. It's no longer this theory coming out of left field that it may have been at some point. The project of Till is, it can be summarized quite easily, which is to make sense of what Frege meant by sin. After sin replaced Bestimmungsweise, and Frege began to distinguish more systematically between sin and Bedeutung. But Frege, of course, never quite explained what sin is. He explained what some of the jobs were, but he never explained to us what it is and how it does what it does. So, in a narrow sense, Till is an explication of sin, but it's much more than that. And while he has taken over some basic tenets from Frege, the mature Frege again, Frege from 1892 and onwards, we also deviate, and I've cataloged some of the differences. But if you look at the project is to set up a logic within which to, and by means of which to analyze particularly natural language, also mathematical language, but that's secondary. It's natural language with all its quirks and all its dependence on empirical factors such as times and worlds and agents. So can we set up a logic which captures much of the expressive power and much of the finesse of natural language, any natural language, not just English, any natural language? That's the project. It's a project which observes compositionality and semantic transparency without exception and without compromise in any sort of context, short of quotational context, but they're unto themselves. Because compositionality is the backbone of any systematic analysis of language. So we cannot compromise on compositionality, nor can we compromise on transparency. We do not have transparency and opacity. We only have transparency and Till. So how do we obtain transparency? That has led to the quest for transparency has led to Till setting up a semantics which is deviant from the standard fare that you would find in model theoretic based philosophy of language, which allows deviation from compositionality and also simply assumes that opacity is a fact of linguistic and logical life, which it shouldn't be. TIL is designed as an extensional logic also of hyperintensional and intensional contexts. So we have one logic, which is extensional, and extensional here means that it observes all the laws of extensional logic. TIL belongs to the paradigm of logical objectivism. That's Frege, of course. It's Bolzano. So truth and falsehood are and meaning are objective, and it's Platonism, absolutely. And meanings reside in a third or Platonic realm, and it belongs to what Kaplan called the golden age of pure semantics, which is characterized by Carlin and Church. Before Quine came along, and before extreme context sensitivity came along. TIL also qualifies as semantic realism, although not in Dummett's sense, right? Because in Dummett, semantic realism claims that the meaning of a sentence is its truth conditions. Not so in TIL. It's semantic realism because it's Platonic, but it doesn't say that truth conditions are intentional meanings. It says that a procedure for determining the truth conditions of a sentence are the meaning of a sentence. What are the phases of TIL? You can slice this up in different ways. I've suggested 6, and I don't know what to say about phase 6 because that's unfolding or about to unfold. But I would say that in the first phase would be located in the 60s when Tichý was beginning to develop the idea of meaning as a procedure. And he wrote some philosophical papers on that, setting out these ideas, and he made some first moves towards developing that idea formally. Phase 2 would be when TIL really took off. It was developed within post-world semantics. So at the time, intensions, functions from post-worlds, were presented as procedures. That didn't last into the 80s, but that was the idea back then in the 70s. And TIL was known at the time as yet another post-worlds semantic theory, although of course it had some quirks. One of the major ones was that almost any analysis would privilege intentions above extensions. For instance, a definite description like the mayor of Ostrava would not pick out or have it as its semantic value any individual. It would pick out, have it as its semantic value a condition, which is or is not satisfied relative to some empirical parameters by an individual. Phase 3 would be when Tichý was working towards his book, when he was beginning to lay down the foundations of TIL as a hyperintensional logic, and when he was also developing his ramified type hierarchy, right? So that he could analyze procedures, what he called constructions, much more carefully. And the 1988 book is where you see a lot of embryonic ideas that we have been developing since then. And what happened in the 90s and the noughts was that TIL was further developed as a hyperintensional logic. People were working on the foundations, but it was mainly, I think, applied to a very wide range, an expanding range of applications of very areas of natural language mainly. After the 2010 book, we've seen a wider range of applications of TIL, but also been working on the foundations. And Kostelec has been instrumental in this because he took a hard look at some of the definitions and found that they were flawed. And he and many and others, including myself, have been worked on these foundations, and we begin to understand even better how TIL actually works. Just working on the minutiae. What happens next? I don't know, but there are more people working on TIL, and I see more work happening on the foundations and the applications. I'm quite confident that TIL will make it into the next decade. So how do these different tenets of TIL work? How do they connect? Again, compositionality is non-negotiable. We must. It's a constraint. It's quite a straitjacket occasionally, but we must observe compositionality because otherwise we can just make stuff up. We just simply claim that this and that work together this way, and by means of magic, something else resolves. How did you get there? Well, just because. We need compositionality. Means that we can work from the bottom and up, and again from the top over, and then decompose and arrive at the bits and pieces. That's what compositionality does. The compositionality should also reign supreme in hyperintentional context. If we want to achieve compositionality, we need an extensional logic also of hyperintentional and intentional contexts. So that's, in a way, you can also present TIL as a project of devising an extensional logic of non-extensional contexts. How do we obtain semantic transparency? We do this by generalizing from the hardest case, which in our case means that we take the semantics that Frege pointed towards with regard to what he called indirect contexts. We work that out formally, and then we generalize that context. We claim that this semantics, which was supposed to be applicable only to cases on the fringe, applies throughout. Right? So we take the abnormal and turn that into the norm. We generalize opacity, if you like, and that gives us transparency. One consequence is that in all contexts, an empirical term will denote an intention and never an extension. A prerequisite for transparency is invariantism, right? Again, which just means that we don't have any kind of context version shift. We don't have one semantics for one kind of context and a different context for a different sort of context. That is as anti-TIL as you can get. One consequence of invariantism, right, that the same semantics applies to all contexts. It's just that in different contexts, different aspects of the semantics of a term will be activated or not. One consequence of that is that all terms are rigid designators, because, for instance, the different description of the mayor of Ostrava is a rigid designator of an intention or an office, and never of an individual. So the idea of flexible and rigid designators doesn't apply to TIL. It's all rigid. What is flexible is who occupies a certain office, and if anyone does. But that's beyond semantics. That's in the realm of facts, not in the realm of meaning. And one among several prerequisites for rendering invariantism operative is dual predication, which means that there's predication de re and predication de dicto. Some predications apply to intentions and other apply to extensions. I'll give an example as we move on. So this is the semantic schema that applies throughout, right, to all contexts. The term expresses a procedure, and that procedure, if it's proper, it yields a product, will have a denotation. And every empirical term is proper because its procedure will always yield an intention, even if it's an intention which cannot be satisfied. And that denotation, which is an intention and an empirical condition, will, if satisfied, at a world and time of evaluation yields a reference, which is beyond semantics and in the factual realm. That's where we have the planets and people and the rest of it. And what is context dependent is whether the procedure or the denotation or the reference, if any, is semantically salient. And that's a matter of which property or which kind of entity that you want to predicate a property, for instance. To get your head around TIL, imagine a typed universe. We're firmly within type theory. Everything in the ontology of TIL receives a type. And basically, there are two kinds of entities in the realm in the universe of TIL. At the highest level of abstraction, everything is either a procedure, which is a higher order entity, or else it's a function, which in most cases is the first order entity. And some of those functions are intensions, right? But intensions and extensions are both first order objects in TIL. Not all of them are first degree, but they're all first order objects, with some marginal exceptions. And also sets and relations are reduced to functions. So a set in particular is reduced to its characteristic function. The technical backbone of TIL is the type lambda calculus with partial functions. So the lambda calculus, Church's lambda calculus, is the logic of functions. And we have partially defined functions in TIL, so not every function yields a value. Again, there are extreme cases where no value at all is forthcoming at any argument. But we have blanks, and there are functions that at some argument do not yield a value. That makes the whole logic somewhat more complicated, but we need them for philosophical and technical reasons. Normally, if people say lambda calculus, they mean the intensional logic, which distinguishes between functions and the values, which is great. But, Frege, for instance, he was will often complain that function and a given value be conflated, but the lambda calculus keeps those two firmly apart. But if you have a hyperintensional and until procedural lambda calculus, then you have an extra layer, right? You have procedures as well, and procedures are not functions, and they're not functional values. Typically, so we need to keep those three apart, right? Procedures, functions, functional values. In the lambda terms of the ideography, the symbolism of TIL, denote procedures. They do not denote functions or functional values. They denote procedures. And a hyperintensional procedural lambda calculus, such as TIL, distinguishes between three kinds of context in which a procedure can occur. I'll elaborate on that. But basically, we have three kinds of context: hyperintensional, intensional, extensional. And they follow different rules. The logic is obviously not the same in the sense that although the same rules apply, there are restrictions on the applicability, but not the validity of various rules relative to which context is applied to. I'll make that clear as we move on. So when we publish, we sometimes say that here's a broadly neo-Fregean take on this or that problem, versus a neo-Manongian or neo-constructivist, what have you, approach. So why would TIL deserve to be called broadly neo-Fregean? Well, at least for the following reasons. First of all, the logical ideography, the symbolism, is inherently interpretive. And if model theoretic semantics is the only semantics you know, this sounds strange, right? This is it's a very old idea. It's of course completely Fregean, that the Begriffsstift, the symbolism, is inherently interpretive. It's meaningful, and in till the lambda terms are inherently interpreted because they represent procedures. You don't have just first a pure syntax and then an interpretation. The syntax and semantics are developed in tandem until. And also denotation is mediated by sense. You're never given something just like that. And also the way something is presented is part of the semantics, right? Contrary to, for instance, or unlike direct reference theory, of Kaplan and Triple and those, the reference fixing method gets thrown away by those people. That's not how it works until the way that you fix something is more important than what gets fixed. So denotation is very much fixed by or mediated by sense. This also is part and parcel of till because till is absolutely top down. First, we have a mode of presentation, and then what it presents. We don't start out with an ontology where we empirically minded, like we have scattered physical objects around us, and then we work upwards from there. It works the other way around. And also the notion of function is central. Of course, Frege notoriously would oscillate between two notions of, well, today consider two notions of function. Function as a computational scheme, which is a function in intention in church, and what we call a procedure, and what some mathematicians would refer to as an intention or a function, and then a mapping, which is simply just a correlation between the elements of a domain and elements of a codomain. When I say function, I always mean mapping. Always mapping in the sense of correlation between domain and codomain. Sets are not primary until nor relations. So that sets us apart from model theoretic semantics. It sets us apart from the Brazilian approach. Right? These are functions are central. But also till is manifestly also non-Fregean. Because the semantics, as you now know, the semantics of till is strictly anti-contextualist and strictly invariantist and transparent. Also, we have, of course, a type theory. Frege absolutely did not have a type theory, as he may have regretted at some point, but it didn't. We do, and we have Tichý would start out with a simple type theory, but then he began to develop a ramified type hierarchy, primarily to avoid vicious circles and all kind of Brazilian mystery. But also, the ramified type hierarchy allows us to have procedures of a higher order present procedures of a lower order. You can't do that within the simple type theory, but you can do that within the ramified type hierarchy, which is absolutely essential to developing till as a hyperintensional logic and not just yet another intensional logic. Part of the ramified type hierarchy is a sample type theory, which is pretty much like Montague's, except that Montague's halfway type S has been factored out into two proper types, standalone types, ground types, worlds, and types. So we have four ground types when we do natural language analysis. You can have a different, partly different type theory if you do other kinds of discourse, but if you do natural language semantics, we need truth values and individuals, of course, for worlds and times. And also, till is anti-actualist and anti-presentist. The actual world and the present time are not in any way semantically privileged until any anchoring of discourse in the actual and the present is mediated through pragmatics, I am at a world asserting something, and I'm making an assertion about whatever world is actual relative to me, and whatever moment is present at my time of speaking. That's the point of departure. But the actual world is not privileged in any way. What we have is simply a logical space of possible worlds, all equal, semantically speaking. And what we do is that we define conditions that a world or world-type pair, roughly speaking, may or may not satisfy. So are you a world-type pair such that you satisfy this condition? And if you do, what is the satisfier of this condition? It could be a truth value, could be a set, could be an individual, what have you. So because we abstract away from the actual and the present, we end up with an ideography, which is, I think, unique to TIL, where we lambda bind variables representing worlds and variables representing time points, which is called explicit intentionalization and temporalization. So whenever you see this formula, the one in blue, you'll probably say, that's TIL. This is what we call a closure, this kind of particular kind of procedure, and this is a procedure which is typed and structured to produce an intension, a condition satisfiable by worlds and times. Anything beyond that, i.e., who or what satisfies this condition, is not a matter of semantics. It's a matter of facts. It's a matter of empirical inquiry to establish who or what, if any, is the satisfier. And also, this is more contentious. Depends on how you read Frege, right? Because Frege sometimes Tuesdays and Thursdays would claim that meaning was individuated up to logical equivalence, and on some other days of the week he would claim that it was a matter of cognitive equipollence, or it was undecided, right? So was it fine-grained or is it coarse-grained? Maybe it's reasonable to say that in Frege, linguistic meaning is individuated in a coarse-grained manner, i.e. up to logical equivalence. That would explain lots of things he says, for instance, about passive and active sentences. Be that as it may, we cannot claim that Frege had a fine-grained notion of meaning. We do know that he was very alert to fine-graining. And what we have taken from Frege is this awareness of the importance of fine-graining. But that fine-graining goes into the procedures, right? So we get fine-grained procedures, which in some cases we simply map onto the syntactic structure of a regimented syntax, like some mathematical syntax, for instance. But we cannot say for certain if we deviate from Frege here or not. Again, these are the symbol types. I won't go through the ramified type hierarchy. That's too involved for now. But it's this fragment is the symbol types. We simply have 4 ground types: worlds times individuals and truth values, and then we define functions over them. And some of those functions are intensions, as we know from possible semantics. That's all that theory does. That type theory does. Procedures. That's this absolute cornerstone of TIL, the ramified type hierarchy, and then the procedures. Those are the 2 cornerstones of TIL. I'll just go through them informally. Of course, they're defined strictly technically, informally, but these are the ideas behind them. So a variable, the letter X is a term, of course, but that's not the variable. The variable is what is denoted by a coded X. So an X is a procedure of one step which produces its value, and that which value, the value that a valuation function has assigned to it. So there's the term, there's the procedure, and there's the value, the product, if you like, of that procedure. And variables are feeders. They feed objects that other more complex or multi-step procedures work on. Trivialization, that's an idiosyncratic feature of TIL. Sometimes it makes sense to refer to trivialization as zero execution, sometimes less so. Mariducci likes to say that Tichý himself didn't quite understand the ramifications of introducing trivialization into TIL. And I think she's right about that, because Tichý didn't get much mileage out of it. All he did was simply to distinguish between Mont Blanc and the mode of presentation of Mont Blanc. But in TIL, Mont Blanc would have a dual duty to discharge. It would be the procedure for presenting Mont Blanc, and it would be Mont Blanc itself, the mountain, which of course neither here nor there. So you can trivialize Mont Blanc, right? And the trivialization of Mont Blanc is not an individual; that's an abstract procedure. But what it trivializes is a rock in the Alps. The trivialization of the superscripted naught of x, that's a one-step procedure, which is non-descriptive. So if I say, if I trivialize Mont Blanc and I type Mont Blanc as an individual, as a Yoda object, then the procedure is reach into the domain of Yoda-typed objects and extract the exact one that is Mont Blanc. And I haven't told you anything about Mont Blanc. I haven't told you it's a mountain or anything about it. Simply get that guy. Right? It's a way to retrieve or call an object from a domain in order to work on it. If X is a procedure, and Mont Blanc is not a procedure, but if you have a procedure, then you can trivialize it. And if you trivialize a procedure, you don't execute it. That's why Mont Blanc. That's why trivialization is sometimes called. We like to call it zero execution, because you don't execute the trivialized procedure. You simply display it. Here, look at it. So you do not execute the procedure. You don't go beyond the procedure. You don't care what it produces, if anything. You simply look at a procedure as the procedure it is. So it's constituents, its sub-procedures, and its structure. Right? The various sub-procedures detailing what to do to what sort of things in which order, in order to obtain a final product of a particular type. So I can display a procedure or I can execute it. And the trivialization of procedure simply displays the procedure without executing it. Single execution, we typically don't want, we typically don't need it. Simply for the simple reason that the default mode in which procedures occur is in the executed mode, not the displayed mode. And Maria has published a paper where she flips that around. So all procedures occur displayed. Of course, then in order to move from procedure to product, you need to execute those procedures. So you have lots of, in that geography, you have tons of superscripted ones. But there's no gain. There's no gain, as she also proves. It's more comfortable to work with procedures that are by default already executed. That's why we need a way to counteract that. And we do that by means of trivialization. We want to block the execution. Double execution, it allows us to jump from A to B to C, such that and if A and B are procedures and C is whatever, Mont Blanc, for instance, needn't be a procedure, then the double execution of A jumps from A to B and from B to C. So the double execution of A produces C. And the relationship between trivialization and double execution is that they're kind of each other's mirror image. They're not duals, they're not interdefinable, but double execution, of course, lowers the type because we descend from procedures to product. If you trivialize a procedure, you go the other way around. Right? You go from the level of a product to procedure. The paper that Maria and I just published is all about the interaction between double execution and trivialization. And if you're not careful, you create some mess on the fringe. Kostadets had identified some problems with some limiting cases, and that's been sorted out now. Compensation is a procedure of functional application. It's not the result of the application, it's not the functional value, it's the procedure of applying a function to a value, to an argument in order to obtain a value. And closure is, in a way, the opposite. It's it's a procedure for forming a function from elements of a domain to elements of a codomain. And a closure is never improper. It always yields something, even if it's a very funny function. It still yields something, even if it's a function with no values, or it's a constant function, or what have you. But it always has a product, or even if it's just the empty set throughout, whatever. Composition can be improper because we allow partial functions, and not all applications will yield a value of a function at a value. So the basic theory is about procedures is this, that there are multiple ways, multiple itineraries, trajectories toward one and the same destination. And we need that in order to capture the fine graining of linguistic meaning and to capture the fine graining of attitudes, for instance, or capture the fine graining of different impossibilities. We don't just have one impossibility of a particular type, we have many impossibilities. Three contexts. Like I said, we have a procedure occurs in one of three contexts, and it's vital to decide within which sort of context a given procedure occurs. So what makes a context hyperintentional is that within that context you have a procedure that occurs displayed, and most often that will be because that procedure is trivialized. It's also important that a procedure does not include as a component its product, or if you present that procedure, you do not present a pair consisting of the procedure and its product. The products are beyond the procedure. This is important, for instance, when you model possible attitudes where people believe something which couldn't possibly be true, but they haven't figured that out because they don't understand what the product of their attitude is. Intentional context, here the procedure in question occurs executed, and so you obtain a function. And this is, for instance, what we would do when it comes to intensional entities, like good old-fashioned possible semantics and its analysis of attitudes, where the mental complement is an intention. You believe that a certain truth condition is satisfied. An extensional context, then we go one step down. So we have a function, and then that function has been applied such that we have a value. That a value can be anything. It could even be another procedure, right? But it might, in most cases, when it comes to natural language analysis, this is where we have people and rocks and planets and sets. values. We also operate with, which is be obvious by now, with 3 degrees of granularity. We have the granularity that applies to procedures and to intentions and to extensions. So the most important thing is how we distinguish between procedures. They are given in and by themselves, they are extremely fine-grained because even a difference in variables, x and y, would make a difference. Typically, that would be completely uninteresting difference. There's no procedural difference. If all you have is a difference between an x in one case and a y in a different place, but they're bound in the same way, in the same scope. Rest of it, they're completely interchangeable. So you want to read that out. That's not an interesting difference. But that's other conversion. But how much further do you go? Particularly what about eta conversion? That's a rough distinction. So typically you don't want to include that when you distinguish between procedures. What about the different kinds of beta conversion? By value, by name, restrictive or not? Depends on the kind of context, kind of language, the kind of discourse that you're analyzing, which criteria would be the most helpful, the most enlightening, the most illuminating to use. And there's no technical fact of the matter here. It's a purely philosophical decision, which demands philosophical justification. Why you would pick this criterion of co-intentionality rather than any other. And that makes for a very interesting philosophical discussion because you can get down to the nitty-gritty quite quickly. Of course, different other theories will have different criteria. They wouldn't use the conversion rules of the Lambda calculus. They would do it differently. But within till we do the Churchian way, right? The Church has its different alternatives. We have just expanded on that, just added to that family of alternatives as a church. The most careful criterion, the most exacting one, the one which probably not land us in hot water, is to combine alpha conversion with just brute meaning postulates. We simply take it for granted that there's a certain meaning postulate in place which regulates that this predicate and that predicate in English are synonymous. We'll assume that. We don't know. And maybe in the final analysis, there is no fact of the matter. But woodchuck, groundhog, held together by a meaning postulate, they are synonymous. And if they are, then there is no procedural difference between their meanings, and these are lexical terms. There's no structure you can play around with. Unlike Yeti and Abominable Snowman, which have different logical structures, right? So they're not co-hyperintentional. Equivalence, that's when two different procedures, so they're not co-hyperintentional, they're not procedurally isomorphic, still share a special bond because they, in two different ways, converge in the same product. Two different routes to the same, leading towards the same destination. And then V concurrence, that's the roughest one, where it depends on evaluation, whether procedures A and B yield the same product or not. And this is typically something we need for extensional contexts. Whereas procedural isomorphism, the most interesting one, that's what we need for instance, substitution within hyperintensional contexts. Just to give an example, this is something I've been working on, just a bit of the paper. It's about the term Vulcan and the object Vulcan, where I interpret Vulcan, Le Verrier's Vulcan, as an office, a condition which can be satisfied by an individual, which would then occupy the role of on the office of Vulcan. And how do I define that office? Where an office is a function from worlds to a function, is a function from worlds to a function from times to individuals, where the second function is partial, because no worlds and times have a Vulcan. Our world doesn't have a Vulcan. It doesn't have an intermercurial planet, a planet orbiting between Mercury and the Sun. But Levry and the astronomers at the time had every reason to assume that there was such a planet. Made every sense in the world to assume that. So what were they looking for? They were looking for the occupant of the office of Vulcan on my Russian reconstruction. So what we have here is a ontological definition, telling you not something about terms. That would be a verbal definition. It's ontological definition. It tells us what kind of object a certain object of a particular type is. I cannot just say Vulcan. I have to define that office, and I define it. But Vulcan is the definiendum to the left, and to the right we have the definient, which is an office. Of course, it's the same office we have on both sides, right? Otherwise, the definition wouldn't work. But the procedure to the left, on the left, is a trivialization of an office. What you have on the right is a closure, which is typed to yield an office, namely the office of the unique object that orbits between Mercury and the Sun. So you have two different procedures, two rather different procedures. One is atomic, the other one is molecular, that converge in the same object, the same office in this case, so they are equivalent. And the office picks out the closure, the definience picks out by means of a description that office. Once I have that office, I trivialize it, and then the trivialization of Vulcan becomes the literal meaning of the descriptive name Vulcan. It's absolutely important that Vulcan, the term, is not described as or construed as a disguised definite description, because in that case, Vulcan, the term, would mean nothing other than the unique individual which orbits between Mercury and the Sun. So that definite description and the apparent name Vulcan would be synonymous. But then there's one of because there's this pair, you have a pair of synonyms. One of them would be semantically redundant. I don't want that. I'm not trying to eliminate names from my from the vocabulary here, contrary to what Russell and Quine were after. So the semantic schema for Vulcan is that the utilization of Vulcan is the sense of that term, and the trivialization, of course, is a procedure, and the procedure has a product, which is this office. And this office may or may not, relative to your choice of world and time, have a satisfier, an occupant. And as it happens, we don't. Right. What is the general method we pursue when we conduct analysis with a TIL? We always have an Alexandrum. In this case, Vulcan is a planet. And we always assume meaning to be literal. It's not metaphorical. We simply read it in a very sort of straightforward way. Okay, some property, being a planet, is predicated of something Vulcan. What's going on here? Right. For instance, if you're analyzing an idiom, you wouldn't do it that way. But here we can apply compositionality, so we decompose the sentence into its meaningful bits. We type them, we assign a meaning to every standalone bit, every categorematic bit, and then we recompose. We present a formal analysis of a piece of English in this case. First, in this case, we disambiguate. Because I'm talking about the deity, the Roman deity of fire and volcanoes. We're talking about the planet that Leverrier was looking for. We're talking about the planet in a science fiction show, Star Trek, I think it is, which is a fictitious planet. Three different kinds of discourse: religious discourse, scientific discourse, empirical discourse, and fictional discourse. And they play with different rules, so we must disambiguate. It would be very extensionist to say, okay, well, Vulcan doesn't exist. Whatever exist means when it doesn't exist. So it's just, it doesn't have a semantics, or if it has a semantics, it's just the same for all three of them, because there's no reason to distinguish, because, it's not out there. That's not how it works until Vulcan and Unicorn are just as good as Neptune and Zebra. Deserve the same treatment, non-extensionalist treatment. Okay, so we decided on which discourse we're analyzing. Secondly, that will dictate this makes I assign to my Vulcan. And secondly, what kind of predication is happening here? Is it the ray? Is it the dictum? And I have to make a choice, because Vulcan is a planet. is not lexically ambiguous. It is structurally ambiguous between predication, the ray, and the dictum. Or so I claim, right, in my paper. Different, we have it, and which side you come down on will dictate what the meaning is, what the truth conditions are, and what the truth value of any would be. So I disambiguated the sentence I'm talking about is the Leverrier case here. We take it apart, the sentence apart, everything gets type, everything gets semantics. Then we build up again. That's the synthesis. Here's depending on the meaning here, right? Because it's the ray or the dictum, so that dictates which logical forming it receives. So I present two forms, one for the ray, one for the dictum, and I run a type check to see if the types check out. And if they do, I'm done. So in the case of predication array, I'm claiming that the assertion is to the effect that the individual which occupies the office of Vulcan at my world and time of evaluation, in my case that's this world, this point, time, is an element of the set of planets. If it's the dictum, it's quite different. I'm claiming that it goes into the package of being the occupant of Vulcan, that you're a planet. Right? So being a planet, having the property of being a planet, is one of the necessary properties of anything that occupies the office of Vulcan. So the dictum, that's an analytic truth. I don't have to enter the world to establish that. It's simply the meaning of what I take, what Vulcan is. Was assumed by Leverrier to be, namely a planet. He was looking for a planet, not a comet or anything else. He was looking for a planet. So Vulcan must be a planet. So when you say Vulcan is a planet, you're simply rehearsing a analytic fact. On the other hand, if you say that if you take it the ray, you're making a claim about the here and now, right? That the occupant of a certain office has a certain property. And this is without truth value at this point. It's not true or false of the occupant that it is a planet, because there's no occupant. So that's undefined, doesn't have a truth value. There are four kinds of, in the empirical case, there are four kinds of predication to the dicta. We just covered the first two. Of course, you can also predicate an empirical property of an office, for instance, that it is vacant, it's occupied, or that it is the most coveted office in the world. Most people want to occupy that office, or this is the mightiest political office on earth. Right? That again is a claim about the office, not the occupant. Or you can simply skip offices. You can simply cut to the chase, right? By simply identifying a set of f's. If you have a singleton, then you extract the sole element and you place that element in a different set, the set of g things. Right? So the single f is a g, which is the Gaussian way of doing it. What have we been up to? Lots of things, I would say. Also because it helps that more people than before are working until. Some of us don't just work until, but if I speak for myself, at least when I put forward a positive solution to a problem, I would use till, and if I'm just being critical, I may or may not use till. So we've been working on the foundations concerning procedures until the problem with trivialization and double execution, identified by Kostelets, as I said, and solved by Maria and myself. Impossibility. So how do we individuate impossibilities in a hyper-intentional manner relative to different types of objects, impossible truth conditions, impossible individuals, so-called, what have you. Daniela Watzek in particular has been working a lot on fictional discourse and aesthetic discourse, arguing, for instance, among many other things, that aesthetic discourse is extremely fine-grained because the medium of the language, the choice of words is also pertinent in aesthetics, unlike this situation when we're analyzing attitudes, for instance. Marie and I have worked on the qualifying into hyper-intentional attitudes. Daniela has been working, and with some colleagues have been working on deontological discourse, using sometimes till and sometimes not. Petzla and I previously are working on the interesting overlap between till and constructivism, particularly Martin Löw's constructivist type theory, because of course we share the idea that the ideography is interpreted, and also that meaning is procedural. I think I in particular have been working on comparisons with neo-mononganisms, priests, and in particular Zoltas, because there's a lot of contact between Zolta and till, less so with priest. They're ahead of us when it comes to inexisting objects and reference to them, application of them. So we've been playing catch up with them. What I just said about Vulcan has to do with descriptive names, and I've just submitted that paper. In the 2010 book, we presented a much elaborated version of some ideas that Tichý used for just in one paper, when analyzing Anselm's proof of the existence of the mightiest being. And we developed that into a full-fledged intentional essentialism, which takes Kripke and then flips it. Kostelets has been working on that also afterwards, and he's been working on the existence of bare particulars, and Maria has just been working on the difference between bare particulars and physical individuals. An ongoing issue that continues to occupy all of us is of course the calibration of hyperintentionality. Just exactly what is how fine is hyperintentionality? How do we calibrate it? How does it work technically when you want to get the details right? And what are some interesting philosophical applications of different measures of fine graining? There is, of course, because we're in the realm of structured meaning. There's, of course, the old problem of the unity of the proposition that Russell was struggling with. Frege was struggling with it in terms of saturation. Plato, if you like, was struggling with it. What is the unity of a logos in Plato? And it is a recurring issue. I put forward a sketch of a solution, but that's not nowhere close to being the final word of that. It would be Trumpian to claim that a problem that Russell and Frege and Plato couldn't solve has been solved. But it's the unity problem is how the different parts of a molecule work together such that they form a coherent whole that may have properties that none of the parts has. And there are different recurses that you need to look out for. Questions and answers, of course, relevant to also to multi-agent systems where different agents with different knowledge bases and different logical intelligence still need to work together and be able to have a rational exchange where they ask questions and give answers and can understand the answers. I was working on, and then we joined in, worked on property modifiers, the intersectives, the pure subjectives, modals, and privatives. I think I at least have said everything I can say on that topic. And then till script, that's again an adjusted version of till that is that really teaches to her computer science students. It has some features that this kind of till doesn't have, that they need and that we typically don't need when analyzing natural language. And of course, there's epistemic and dialectic logic, as always. How do we analyze attitudes? Seeking, fearing, wanting to become, believing that, knowing whether, the rest of it. We always work on that. And that was one of the strong features of till when I came across till in the first place, back in a different millennium. And I think till is still extremely strong when it comes to, capable, strong in that sense when it comes to aptitude logic. Where do we go from here? I think it's still interesting to compare till with and against Waterloo and against the Newman-Ongians. I think that there's things we can pick up from them. And of course, till is at variance with model theoretic semantics. We do have model theoretic semantics in the intensional segment or fragment, but not beyond that. So it's good to have allies when we sort of take on the model theorists, model theoretic colleagues. One thing that Maria and I want to work on is the Russell-Mayhew paradox, where you get into Cantorian problems with cardinality. You want to make sure that till doesn't fall afoul of Cantor's theorem, of course. We haven't shown that, but I think it should be done. And the Russell-Mayhew paradox comes up every now and then in discussions of structured meaning, and it would be great to show that till is unaffected. I'm sure when working on this solution, we'll come to realize things about till that we weren't aware of even existed, just like the things that Cossodets discovered. And me myself, am working right now on on making sense of objectual identity. So we don't have to be cognitive, we don't have to be linguistic about it, and we don't run into the Trotarian objection to objectual identity that it's either trivial or nonsensical. So how will we do that? I'm drawing here on Martin Löw, in particular, who's published briefly on that. without getting into the Frege exegesis, because it's an open debate in among Fregians whether Frege shifted from a metalinguistic to an objectual view, or was objectual throughout, or was even metalinguistic throughout. I'm not trying to settle that, but I want to elaborate what is said in Till about objectual identity. Hesper's phosphorus, that kind of thing. We have a solution, but we should elaborate on it. And also justify that it's objectual, but without restricting ourselves to just the extensional level. Again, as always, there's the issue of constituents and their interaction within a compound. Daniela Watzek in particular is still working on religious and fictional discourse and making headway there. And then there's a blank. We don't know, do we? It's also an invitation for others to engage with Till, even by completely tearing it apart, because that gives us something to play up against. So that's the green question mark. Final slide. In the Kosteret's 2024 book, there is a nice quick, as he calls it, crash course on Till on the opening pages. The first section, 14 pages of the 2010 book, is also kind of a grand tour Till, placing it in systematic historical context, showing how it had points of contact with the semantics in the 60s and 70s, but then started to diverge away from it still more. And of course, as Susanna was kind enough to mention, the old introduction I wrote for the collection in 2004. And that's it. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Bjoern, for an interesting lecture. And now I would like to open the discussion and questions, if there are some. You can raise your hand. Tadeusz.
Yes. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, thank you. That's super interesting. So I have one small question, and it's connected with the one of the last slides that you provided, namely with those applications of Till. So I saw that there was on the list a mention of your work on descriptive names, right? So could you perhaps say something more about this? How this application to the problem of descriptive names look like? Briefly.
Yeah. So, I mean, the term descriptive name, I think, goes back to Kaplan, Kripke, and
Evans, obviously, right?
Sorry, Evans. Yes, yes, absolutely, Evans. Yes, exactly, and his Julius, right? So the full paper has a comparison of discussion of his Julius, the inventor of the zipper, and Newman 1 and Neptune in Kripke, and also what he said about Vulcan in the John Locke lectures. But this, so do we even want a category of descriptive name until? Yes, I think we do, because it is a constraint that meaning is literal. So if we have a single term like Vulcan, capital V, then it's a standalone term. It's a categorimatic term, which shouldn't be analyzed away by means of in the way Russell and Quine tried to do that. But it's obviously not a name in the same way that Bjoern Jespersen is a name, right? Because I'm here. Imagine there's a person behind the screen, and not just pixels. So I'm in the physical domain. I'm out there. I can be identified by means of a description or by means of ostension, right? Importantly, so whatever is true of me, I can be demonstrated. I can be pointed at, right? It'd be the receiving end of an index finger. You can't do that with certain items that for which we still have what are linguistically and syntactically speaking proper names. And I think we should simply take for granted that they are proper names, but of a particular kind. Because I cannot take an individual and then trivialize it and then say that that trivialization is the meaning of that name, because there's no individual out there to trivialize. And what isn't there cannot be trivialized. So how do you do this? What a descriptive name until is characterized by the fact that the meaning of the name is a trivialization, but that trivialization produces not an individual, but an individual in intention, which is an office. It can be an empirical condition. First and second, that how do we even identify that office? I'll give you anything to work from. So I need to make that trivialization equivalent to, but not co-intensional with, another procedure, which is a closure, which is typed and structured to produce an intention. And then, because I have a definition, it is by fiat that these two different procedures will yield the sum object, which is an office. And once I have an office, I have an intention, an intentional entity, and intentional entities come with requisites, which are individually necessary properties and other intentions that any occupant or any satisfier of that condition must have. Right? So if you want to be the Pope, it's a requisite of that office that you must be Catholic. You must live in the Vatican. You must be the Bishop of Rome. You must read Latin, what have you. Right? Those are all requisite properties. So a descriptive name is a proper name, but it denotes an office and equivalent to a closure. And that office comes with requisite properties. That's why I have the distinction between predication de re and de dicto in this case. So it's key that I can make a case for a predication such as Vulcan is a planet as being structurally ambiguous, ambiguous between predication de re and de dicto. And then you can, but in the paper version also says, okay, what about Neptune, right? Because when Le Verrier went in search of Vulcan, he was trying to do what he already done successfully with Neptune, he and others, right? That Uranus has an orbit which is a bit funky. There is something heavy up there which exerts a certain gravitational pull on Uranus. There has to be something, and that it has to be so large and so heavy that it's a planet. It's got to be a planet. So in my reconstruction, they defined an office, the office of Neptune. They went in search of which had some characteristics, and one of those characteristics was that it would have a certain orbit and a certain gravitational pull. They went in search of the satisfier of that condition, right? Like seeking the fountain of youth. It's the same thing. They're seeking the object exerting this gravitational pull on Uranus, and they found one, right? They didn't find the fountain of youth, but they did find a planet. That's how Neptune was discovered. But how about the term Neptune? Because the term Neptune, in quotes here, right? On my reconstruction, started out as the name of an office. But these days, when we say Neptune, we are obviously referring to an individual, not an office. So what I suggest in the paper version is that we have two terms, two names here, and they are held together by polysemy. So there's an internal link between them, but they're homonymous. have the same shape, and it's stronger than homonymy. It's polysemy because there's an internal link. The link is not arbitrary, as between bank, the money bank and the bank you sit on. There's an inner link here, so it's polysemy. And what happens is that once you have a satisfier, why bother about the office? Because you got your guy, right? So now you introduce a new term, which is polysemous to the original term, and you use this new shape, which is the same shape but with different meaning, to denote the planet. That's what I suggest. So that's the Neptune case is a success case, and then you can make the step from referring to an office to referring to an individual. If you have a failed case like Vulcan, you don't make that second step. You're stuck with the office. That's it here. And it is, and the name, it's a name, but it's also descriptive because it comes with descriptive material thanks to the closure that the trivialization is equivalent to. There's descriptive material in the closure. Right? It's about being a planet. It's about orbiting, and it's about being having a certain relationship with the Sun and Mercury.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for questions, and I would like to ask you if there are any other questions. You can also write in chat if you don't have a camera and microphone. If not, I have a question. I would like to ask you, you mentioned that, and I also know that DIL is a very powerful tool for analyzing natural languages, yet it seems to me that it usually analyzes just English. I would like to ask you whether there are any approaches to analyze some other languages, for instance, some very unusual ones, not just, I don't know, Indo-European languages, because it could show the limits or also applications of TIL. And I didn't see it in your list, so that's why I'm asking.
Completely fair, and actually, it's the answer is yes. By the way, but in my case, it's been marginal. But I analyze English examples because then I know that my readers can understand the examples, right? Because they read the full paper. But English is quite quirky. It's from a logical point of view, English is a holy mess. And I can say that to Slavic speakers because your language is somewhat more grammatically regimented. And I think some colleagues who I think are monoglottic speakers, that would be English speakers, sometimes simply assume that that English grammar will map onto logical structure. I think someone like Geoffrey King, I think, might be guilty of that when it comes to his theory of structured meaning and how meaning is held together. I hope I'm wrong, but that I think that seems to be the case. The examples I've used occasionally have, for instance, come from Hungarian, where, for instance, predication works differently. There is no copula in the third person singular, present tense in Hungarian. The word order is different. In some cases, you have incorporating features, like in the first person singular present tense, where subject, object, and verb are just one word, like log, I see you, one word. So it seems we're analyzing an atom. Whereas in English, obviously, we're not analyzing an atom, we're analyzing a sentence with 3 bits. Or the old problem of one word words in Latin, for instance, where words for the weather, right? It's just one word. Or in Italian, for instance, it's raining, piove, or c'è psi, right? It's a one word sentence. So do analyze that as a trivialization, or if you do that, any reference to anything empirical is lost at the level of the ideography, it only crops up at the level of type, because we're still typing something empirical. I'm typing something in the case of it rains. I'm typing something which is empirical. So and that goes into here. I have whatever the procedure is. The product is a truth condition, which is a state of the world. But that's only in the type theory I have any preference to anything empirical. Right? So the case of one word words is an example where problems crop up that you don't get in English, because you don't have one word sentences in English. You have elliptic phrases, but that's something else. You can always spell them out. I think that Aleš Horák, for instance, and his group have also been working on a corpus of Czech and using TIL or adjusted version of TIL for that. They're coming at it from a linguistic point of view, not a less of a philosophical, logical point of view. I think predication is an interesting case, because predication is typically supposed to be a nexus between, in the similar case, a name and a property, right? And when we teach introductory logic, we just say, well, it's capital F and lowercase a, right? So little a is an F thing, right? Alfred is fortunate. Capital F, little case, lowercase a, and that's all there is to it. And that's supposed to be predication. And if you want to be fancy, you have brackets to symbolize functional application, but you don't say a functional application because that confuses first-year students. So you don't really account for predication. However, the problem with predication hooks up with the property with the problem of the unity of the proposition. I think the place to look for unity comes the guide towards solving the unity problem is to solve the problem of predication. The thing about predication is still that it's not a standalone operation. We don't have an earmarked operation in TIL for predication. Or like Bjoern, for instance. Instead, functional application is the logic of predication in TIL, but functional application is composition, procedure for composition. There's so many other things in TIL, not just predication. So how would I justify that this particular instance of functional application is predication rather than something else like instantiation or something, that kind of thing. So it takes. I'm ranting a little bit, but getting clear about predication goes through getting clear about composition and how that works, and arguing philosophically, because you can do it technically, that some instances of composition are instances of predication, others are not. In particular, they're not instantiation. And then also arguing why predication is what unifies a compound structure, without immediately setting off a regress. If you're at this stage, you have abstracted away from any particular language, be it Inuit or English or Georgian. So you're strictly at the level of logical analysis. What worries me about what I'm saying is that we're coming close to kind of a becoming Chomskyan here, right? That any natural language will inherently have the means to predicate properties of objects. And should we assume that? I think we're assuming that until. I'm not sure we can make that assumption though. I'm not sure we can make this assumption, which is basically empirical, about a universal such as predication. So what is the conclusion to your question? I think I've been making. I've never thought about it in exactly those terms. I think the conclusion is that we are simply assuming that every natural language, has enough expressive power to embody predication. It may take this, that, or the other form in this, that, or the other language. But it could well be that we have some forms, logical forms at the level of till symbolism that doesn't map back to each and every human language out there, which would be an anti-Chomskyan result. Can I leave it at this, because it's because I don't have any definite answer to give you, but let me stress what I said at the outset. This is not till is not an analysis of English. There's a link with Montague here, right? Because one of the opening phrases of one of his seminal papers was that we can analyze English pretty much like you would analyze a obviously regimented language like a piece of mathematics. That was a big breakthrough. It was a radical departure from what Russell and Frege had said about natural language, that it's all over the place and it barely has a logic, and the logical analysis that we offer of a given input from natural language may be completely different from the syntactic structure. That's why Russell didn't think twice about butchering, as it were, the surface syntax of the FSCG, where the F has no counterpart in the natural analysis. That's not how you can do it until. It's a constraint until, because language's meaning is supposed to be literal, that every kind of grammatic item of a given analysandum maps onto a standalone piece of logical syntax in the till ideography. So we share this point of departure with Montague, but it requires us to regiment English. So are we analyzing natural language? I think we're analyzing a slightly sanitized version of natural language, right? It's obviously we're leaving out all the half sentences and the R's and the ums and the all the misspoken bits of natural language. We sift on that way, but we also analyzing kind of neat textbook natural language. But I think what makes natural language interesting to analyze compared to first mathematics is that we have attitudes over the place. We have extreme context sensitivity. We have lexical ambiguity. We have structural ambiguity, and it's interesting to sort that out. And in a full regimented language, you wouldn't have any of that. So that's why we need more expressive power, for instance, in till. Does that go somewhere toward answering the question?
Thank you very much. I cannot see any hand raise, and it doesn't seem to even in chat there is no question. But our time is more or less over. So if there aren't any questions, and I can see any, I would like to thank Bjoern again for your excellent talk and for introduction to TIL, which is very difficult. So thank you. Thank you for being with us. And I just want to announce that the next lecture will be in 18th of January, and we will move from Czech Republic to Poland, because the lecture will concern a dialectical theory of meaning and will be given by Pavel Grabarczyk. Pavel Grabarczyk, yes, that's the point. And we will also have a workshop on philosophy of science in the Visegrad countries in the end of January. The call for papers are now closed, so we don't announce like call for papers. But if you are interested in philosophy of language, and TL is part of philosophy of language in Visegrad countries, there will be another workshop in September in Warsaw, so you can join us there. So thank you very much for all of you for joining us today, and I hope that you will have a nice Christmas the way you loved with the ones you loved. So have a nice evening, and I hope we will see each other again.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you, Björn. Bye.